Today, I'd like to talk about what I call the Galileo Mistake, which is a twist on the Wade Rowland book Galileo's Mistake: The Archaeology of a Myth, published by Thomas Allen Publishers in 2001. Wade Rowland makes a very persuasive case against the popular lesson drawn from the story of Galileo Galilee's confrontation with the Roman Catholic Church. Most of us were taught a simplified version of the Galileo story. Galileo proved that the sun is at the center of the solar system. The Roman Catholic Church believes that the center of the universe is the earth and refuses to listen. And eventually, science defeats religion in that sphere. It's a powerful story, but that's not quite what happened. In reality, many Catholic thinkers of Galileo's time, including Pope Urban VIII, suspected that Galileo was probably right. They were not rejecting the idea of a sun-centered solar system out of blind dogma. What they did question, however, was Galileo's claim of scientific certainty. To say something is a proven scientific fact, you need evidence that meets the standards of the time. In this case, the key test was whether you could detect a tiny shift in the positions of nearby stars as the Earth supposedly moved around the Sun, called stellar parallax. With the instruments available in Galileo's day, that shift was far too small to measure. So, while heliocentrism was a strong and useful theory, it was not yet proved by the best available tools. So the clash was really about two things. The first thing is the idea of what counts as scientific proof. It wasn't just a Bible versus telescope ideology. Galileo claimed, for instance, that the tides were proof that the Earth revolved around the sun. Well, I think most school children know that tides are actually caused by the moon revolving around the Earth. He also claimed that his mathematical model of planetary motion proved that his theory was true. The math was right. Unfortunately, Johannes Kepler earlier had already published a more accurate mathematical description of planetary motion in 1609. He based it on ellipses rather than circles, and yet Kepler somehow was never called a heretic, probably because he only proposed it as a useful model, not as truth. The pattern of discovery shows again and again in the history of science. Newton's laws of motion worked beautifully for centuries, and still do, but until more precise measurements of Mercury's orbit revealed small discrepancies. Einstein's theory of relativity explained those discrepancies and gave us a deeper view of gravity and space-time. Yet we still use Newton's equations every day because they work well in most situations. In other words, even when the math works, we haven't necessarily found final truth. What we found is a model that works within certain limits, usually until better measurements reveal where it breaks down. Modern science now often deals with things that are far too small, far too large, or far too distant to observe directly. And because of this, it relies heavily on layers of instruments, computer models, and prior theories. Scientists have to trust their tools, their training, and the community that checks and publishes results. That doesn't make science untrustworthy. It makes it human. It also means that science, like faith, involves starting assumptions and trust in authorities and methods. The second thing is that having a scientific model that holds up after the attempt to falsify it does not automatically lead to having found truth. Truth is a subject that transcends the limits of scientific methodology. Science does not answer certain questions, existential questions such as why do I exist or what is the basis of morality. It certainly has not yet answered the question of the basis and origin of human consciousness. Faith, in turn, is not about believing without evidence. Some things cannot be measured by the tools of science. Those require different tools. What are these tools? Well, in the Christian tradition, faith draws on things like personal experience. Have you experienced the love of God? The shared wisdom of a community is another tool, and the authority of Scripture and history. What do I mean by that? The Gospels, for instance, rely on eyewitness accounts by Matthew and by John, as well as reports that are based on interviews with eyewitnesses, such as those of Mark and Luke. Skeptical modern scholars live centuries and ideologies away from the action. Meanwhile, early manuscripts of those books abound, suggesting that the events recorded in them were believed for much longer than our modern skeptics have been around. The Bible itself also describes faith, in Hebrews chapter 11, for instance, as confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. And then it points to people like Noah, Abraham, and the prophets, who trusted God based on his past actions and promises in their experience, even when they could not see the final outcome. This is not blind guessing, but a reasoned trust in a God whose character and works have been witnessed over and over again over time. Now, having said all of the above, science is not the opposite of faith. It's simply one more way human beings, with limited tools, try to understand various aspects of reality, some of which are physically measurable and others which are not. That's where faith comes in. Seen in this way, though, Galileo's story becomes a cautionary tale for both sides. Galileo reminds us that scientists can overstate what their evidence really proves. And the church of his day reminds us that religious institutions can mishandle disagreements and appear hostile to inquiry, even when they are not. The deeper lesson is that both science and faith require humility. So, what is the Galileo mistake? Basically, hubris. In reality, we should be honest about the limits of our methods. We should be clear about the role of our assumptions and what we trust, and careful about claiming more certainty than our evidence truly supports. Those principles will result in better science as well as better theology.